Hi everybody, meteorologist Joe Chaffee. Welcome to the Monday night Joe Chaffee weather show after a good weekend, I hope, for most of you, unless you were New York Giants or New York Jet fans. It was a good weekend for me. It is 7:02 Eastern Time. Today is the 7th of October, 2019, and we have a lot of stuff going on. I mean, really, just a lot of stuff between a typhoon out in the Pacific, a super typhoon, Hagibis. I hope I'm getting this right. Top winds of 140 knots, gusting to 170 at the moment, and is actually forecast to strengthen a little bit more to 145, gusting to 175. And we've got a pretty impressive water vapor imagery loop of that. And then, of course, we've got two systems that we're going to be dealing with back home here in the USA. One is a low that is going to be developing off the southeast coast of the United States, and that is going to have impact on the weather now from Delaware all the way up to southeastern New England. And judging from how weather models have been handling this, there's been a lot of variability here, trying to figure out just exactly what's in play. You have a very interesting block that is set up in the Atlantic, not the traditional Greenland block as we often look at talk about during the wintertime, but you have this system in the east just essentially being trapped by high pressure to the north, a potential tropical system to its east, and also we've got a deep trough that's coming into the west, and that's going to produce system number two that we're going to talk about, which is a early season snowstorm for the northern plains, and for some areas in Montana, it'll be the second snowstorm of this very young fall/winter season that has already gotten underway in some places. So we're going to take a look at all of this stuff and just kind of try to make sense of it all, because there's still a lot of pieces to this that I'm not 100% sure of. First off, you have a cold front that is coming on through tonight, and we can see that all too well. Please tell me that my WPC map didn't disappear on me, because if it did, I am going to be very upset. Oh boy. Okay, well, I'll try and find it in the meantime. So here we go. So let's start with, just in case it's hiding. It's not. All right, so let's start with the U.S. satellite tonight. And the east is just covered with clouds. The only exception to this was right along the immediate coast, where we had actually a fair amount of sunshine today that took temperatures up into the 70s to near 80 in some places. And you see all this moisture that's streaming south to north. You've got this weather front that's moving now into, looks like it's already past parts of western New Jersey, northwestern New Jersey, and into parts of the Hudson Valley. That's sliding southeastward. You have all this moisture that's running up with clouds and showers from the Caribbean northeast to over the Bahamas and east of Florida. Then you've got some more clouds that are further east of there, as low pressure is going to be taking shape there off the southeast coast. Meanwhile, huge area of dry air covering the northern and central and even the southern plains and back to the western lakes. And you can see this system in the upper left is the deep trough that is going to be diving into the Rockies and plains. And all of this stuff is really very intricately woven together in terms of how it's going to play out in the eastern part of the U.S. When we head into the middle and latter part of this week. So let's get started here with, first off, let's just do some watches and warnings that are up. Starting to see the beginnings of some marine warnings that are going up with gales for the coastal waters, especially the offshore coastal waters. There are no coastal flooding issues that are being indicated at the moment. You have out to the west, with the system coming into for the northern Rockies and northern plains, we have winter storm warnings up over a chunk of western Montana. A lot of this area was under the gun with winter storm warnings back just a week and a half or so ago. And then we have winter storm watches that are now up for a good portion of the state of Wyoming and into parts of western South Dakota, and it looks like one county so far in northwestern Nebraska. So we're gonna see more of these when we check back in tomorrow morning and tomorrow evening in particular, because we're going to probably see watches being pushed eastward through both Dakotas and maybe even into northwestern Minnesota before this is all said and done. So it's kind of odd, I guess, to have back-to-back snowstorms here in October. Well, the first one actually happened in September. Now, about 8 or 9 days later, we're seeing what's going to be another one for that particular area. And as we said, that is going to be an issue with respect to how the system in the east behaves. It's one of several puzzle pieces that are in play. All right, so we've got I got the Caribbean loop here to show you the close-up view of these disorganized clouds and showers that are extended from the Caribbean northeastward out into the Atlantic. So we are already seeing the beginnings of what is going to be a low that is going to develop off the southeast coast of the United States. The process is already getting underway, and now, of course, we've got this weather front that is up to the north that we're waiting for. And by the way, just if you use this tool, you can add the latitude and longitude so you can get an idea when these storms are running around. With respect to the other system, it's actually east of 50 degrees west. You can't really see it here on this view. You can only see the sort of the upper right. You can see the clouds that are running north to south. So that's on the back edge of that particular low that we're waiting to see how that develops, because again, that is also going to be a key to all this. Also figured we could take a look at the water vapor imagery tonight, because you can at least certainly pick out the energy that is running around here and going to be part of all of this. And that is, of course, here's your Caribbean moisture that's just sort of shooting up offshore, and you're probably going to get your low that's going to develop somewhere in here off the southeast coast. And there might actually be a second little low that forms down here somewhere and trails this parent low along. At the end of the day, I think the parent low is going to wind up being the one that's more dominant, and it'll probably absorb much of what's there. Let me just make this picture a little smaller so I can get this out of the way a bit better. Meanwhile, here we have, you look carefully up here, up in the Great Lakes, of course, you've got this upper trough that is swinging through. Hello, let's try it again. Upper trough, swinging through. And that is going to be pushing this particular cold front by. I'm drawing in the front from where it was earlier. It's actually probably further to the east. And of course, you're seeing moisture that is running southwest to northeast, the dry patch of air that's behind it. And then you have this deep trough that's coming in to the Pacific Northwest. You can already begin to see, by the way, offshore, you got this cirrus moisture plume that's way out here in the Atlantic. So you can almost pick out a pathway as to where this surface low is going to wind up. Somewhere in here, I would suspect, is where we'll eventually wind up getting it. I think it may wind up being a bit more tucked into the coast, which will have implications for the kind of weather that you might see from southeastern New England down to southern New Jersey, Delaware, and into Maryland. This is going to be one of those situations that, of course, obviously the further northwest you go, there's going to be a cutoff here in terms of the impact as far as rain and also as far as the wind goes. Now I'm going to bring up, I usually have the WPC map preset, and for some reason it's not quite there. So we'll get the 7-day total. I'm going to use this graphic here so you'll see it. And one of the things I want to at least point out with respect to what WPC, the Weather Prediction Center, is seeing here is that you'll notice that over Long Island, cutting Long Island in half, eastern Connecticut and southeastern Massachusetts out to the Cape, indicating several inches of rain out of this. And this is not going to be from anything we get tonight, by the way. This is all from the coastal low. and even an inch of rain back to about interior New Jersey, just inland of the coast, maybe west of the Turnpike. I'm sorry, west of the Garden State Parkway, showing up as about an inch or so of rain. Some of that is going to be from tonight, but I don't think it's going to be very much. I think most of it is going to wind up being, at least from the way WPC is drawing this map, because this is from 0Z tonight through 0Z next Monday night, and there's nothing going on in between now and then except for this front coming through, and then the coastal lows. I think the majority of the precip that's being indicated here is from the coastal low, and also you can see the moisture that's being indicated by WPC across the northern plains and over into northern Minnesota, into the western lakes, fairly substantial here. With liquid rainfall amounts have melted down to about several inches, and also showing liquid amounts of up to a couple of inches in some of the mountains in Montana. So there's your winter storm warnings, certainly justified from the respective WPC's forecast. So let me get rid of this, and we're going to go back to. I want to go to let's go to the U.S. radar. I'm sorry, I'm just a little bit behind tonight, so I'm going to have to I'm doing a few things on the fly, and also having a little bit of difficulty with the computer tonight. Some of these maps, I guess because of the amount of data pulling down on some of these satellite loops, it's slowing up some of these things, so I'm trying to keep them clear. This is what it's been pretty much all day. I've been waiting forever for this. The eastern fringe of this rain to move out of Pennsylvania and from the Catskills, and it's finally started to, because we're seeing the edge of the rain, the eastern edge of the rain now, along Route 84 and just north and west of New York City, coming into the northern and western counties of New Jersey and going southeast from there. It's taken literally all day long for this area to move about 50 or 60 miles in terms of the eastern flank. The western flank is also starting to make some progress. So the spots in the middle have done fairly well with rainfall. Johnny Quest, you got a wall of rain on your doorstep there. I see it down into West Virginia coming on the other side. And we are also seeing some rain showers now off the Carolina coast and in Florida, in particular down into northeastern Florida, southeast Georgia, and also down off the Florida coast. So you got all this moisture that is shooting up from the tropics into the subtropics, and some of that moisture obviously is going to be getting involved with that low that is developing along the eastern seaboard. And with respect to, we'll bring up a surface map here and take a look at how the 21Z map is plotted. So we still don't really see, we do have lower pressures down in the southeast and off the southeast coast to some degree, but we still don't have any kind of surface low, although there is a south wind at this buoy that is way out there at about 28 and roughly, I'm going to say that's 60, is that 70? That's 70. Yeah, so I'm sorry, so about 71 or 71 and a half. So you do have a south wind there, so there might be the very beginnings of a weak low that is developing. And in the meantime, you've got the surface front getting hung up here. Hang on, folks. Bear with me. There we go. So we've got the surface front now as of 5 o'clock. And you'll notice, by the way, when you matched it up from the radar before, that much of the rain is really on the other side of this front. There's very little going on ahead of it. So we're not seeing really any kind of shower and thunderstorm activity with the frontal passage. It's more overrunning precip that's occurring behind it. So that front making eastward progress. And that front, by the way, is going to weaken. You see the next high in Kansas is going to be building up toward the northeast, and eventually you're going to see a big high-pressure cell settle up in southeastern Canada and northern New England, which is going to be the driver for the tight pressure gradient in the eastern part of the United States. And, of course, when we look at the northwest, you start to see all this energy that's coming in, which is going to be the makings of our snowstorm number 2, which is going to be getting underway in short order. So let's start now. Let me get rid of this, and get rid of, I will come back to that. That's Typhoon Hagibis. Hagibis or Hagibis. But we will come back to that. And let's get rid of that. And let's go right to the weather models this afternoon, because they are, speaking somewhat loudly with regards to how this is all going to play. And I'm going to pull up the North Atlantic view, because I want to show you, at least give you a good feel for what's happening when I mentioned earlier about a bit of blocking going on. So starting with the map for 8 o'clock tonight, you're going to notice here, this is the low that the Hurricane Center is mentioning as a 50% chance of developing into a tropical depression or a subtropical depression, or possibly a subtropical or tropical storm in the next few days. Here is, you've got this high that's to the north of it. You've got weakness in terms of the pressure field off the southeast coast right in here. This is where you're going to have your surface low come out at some point during the day tomorrow and run up to the northeast. And of course, you've got your high that is going to be building up into eastern Canada and over toward Nova Scotia and Newfoundland. But take a look at what happens here on the surface. The low is forming off the southeast coast. The high building up in New England. The high that is to the north of the system in the middle of the Atlantic slides towards the Azores. So now you're kind of left with, by the time we get to Wednesday afternoon and evening, when I say blocking, you've got this big surface high right up here, okay? And this low would love to go up to the northeast, but it really can't because of this high that is just kind of holding there. So you could argue that, well, then it should be moving to the east, point of least, go toward the point of least resistance. The problem is that you've got this developing low and possible tropical system to the east. So it really can't go anywhere. There's no outlet at all. There's some troughing here, but that's not really having any impact on trying to pull this thing out to the northeast. So that's not going to happen. So you're basically, at the low is basically going to be at the mercy of this brick wall high and the system to the east of it. And as a result, it's going to try to push northward and maybe even nudge a bit northwestward. This is something that the European showed very strongly today. I was a little shocked by it after showing this sort of suppressed look for so long, but that didn't really make a lot of sense given what was going on. But when we move into Thursday, this is the new GFS, which was to the left of the prior run. But the bottom line is the players really involve that big surface high to the north, the tropical system to the east, and let's now throw in this system, the developing snowstorm that's going to be out to the west, because that actually could be viewed, if everything were moving along in a normal atmosphere, that could certainly be viewed as somewhat of a kicker. But the problem is, with nothing moving here, well, this is being slowed down to a crawl. So eventually it does give way. Eventually it does get out of the way, but it is going to take some time for it to do so. If we look at this from the upper air standpoint, you see it a bit better. That trough that's out just comes onto the scene there on the left, comes into the picture. By the time we get to Thursday morning, it's really having a tough time pulling eastward. So that leaves energy to be focused right there. Okay, so here's where your upper low is on the GFS anyway. So there's going to be some kind of surface low pretty close to that. And also the fact that this system is probably going to wind up absorbing whatever tropical system is out there over time. But once that happens, that actually does eventually open up an alleyway. And you'll notice that as this trough in the west swings eastward, it will finally, when we get toward Friday night and Saturday, open up that upper low off the east coast to southeast of New Jersey and Long Island and take it on out to the northeast. That brings a cold front through here and brings down some fairly chilly air for early next week. And there's another trough that comes in right behind it. But It's amazing when you look at this, by the way, when you go back and you remember when we had the upper high, and I'm going back to last Friday where you still have some semblance of that upper high in the southeast, and what has transpired since then in terms of the overall pattern change that has taken place, particularly across North America. It's been a substantial change. I mean, we've seen it change all across the Northern Hemisphere, but this is, it's astounding how sometimes when you see something that's held on for so long, and we finally have broken that, where we're getting these bigger systems that are coming in and moving eastward. Now, the European today, and from Patreon members, I did a special weather in 10 on the European, which you can always go back and review just to give you an idea. So the European, same story here with respect to what's happening off the east coast and up into southeastern Canada. Here comes your shortwave trough. You can pick it out pretty well. This is the shortwave in the southern stream. The northern part, that the system up in the northwest, is still not quite visible here. And that shortwave now, of course, amplifies a bit into this upper low. And the European has it, the upper low sitting just south and east of coastal New Jersey. This is for Thursday morning. So, any surface low is going to wind up getting wrapped up pretty close to this upper low. And the European did exactly that on its surface maps. And then also here, you get this western system, this wrapped up strong trough in the west with the snowstorm that we're talking about for the northern Rockies and northern plains. And that swings into the Great Lakes and eventually kicks it on out. But the European today, really for the first time, has kind of caught on to this idea that the system in the east is going to be a bit more wrapped up than what was originally figured. And the delay of the trough coming out in the west and the tropical system that's going to be to the east of this, all playing hand in hand. And we could still see certainly some changes in all of this, but I think we're getting pretty close here with regards to how this is all going to play. And here's how it looks on the European's surface with 24-hour increments here. So you see your coastal low Wednesday morning. You start to develop it Tuesday. You see the coastal low well to the northeast of North Carolina. You see the possible tropical system further to the east in the middle of the Atlantic there. And then Thursday, the low just kind of pins back northwest and westward, and the pressures actually fall down to about 1,000 millibars. And it's still sitting there on Saturday morning before it finally gets kicked away to the northeast. So the implications with respect to the European, I'm going to use the GFS with regards to what it did late this afternoon. The European was very aggressive with rainfall amounts, showing some 3, 4, 5 inch rain amounts. I don't know how real that is. In order for that to happen, you're going to have that surface low have to be pinched pretty close to the coastline. But the late day GFS tries to give a similar idea here. If you watch how the surface low evolves, it moves northeast and then turns north and just kind of pivots back northwestward, and you get the rain to just sort of sweep in from off the ocean. If you wind up with that deeper low north and west, you certainly are going to get gales to the coast from southeastern Massachusetts down through Long Island and coastal New Jersey, and you're going to see some heavy rain that's going to come in. How far west that heavy rain gets remains to be seen, but we'll figure that out tomorrow. And you also see how the low doesn't really move, even though if you look out on the left and you watch the low and cold front with the northern plains snowstorm there sweeping eastward, it really doesn't move this surface low off the New Jersey coast. You still have a bit of a high built down in between from Newfoundland and Nova Scotia. So you just got to wait a little bit longer, and you finally get into Saturday, and then this is where it finally kicks away and weakens and moves on out to the northeast. So the GFS rainfall totals today, and I'll include the rain from tonight, which is probably on the order of about, subtract out a half an inch, but if you take these amounts that the GFS is giving and double them, and that would give you at least what the European is showing. And the European you would probably have to quadruple them or more for southern New Jersey, southeastern Pennsylvania, because it actually gave Philadelphia about 4 inches worth of liquid. I don't know if I want to believe that. That would really that would be if we wind up with a low very close to the coast and you get all this moisture out in the Atlantic that is going to be sweeping back westward. All right, let's spend a little bit of time now. Let's talk about the system out in the west. Because that is going to be, for this time of year, this is going to be a pretty solid snow producer. And you can watch it here on the surface, and I'm going to switch to the upper air. You can see this low that forms in northern Colorado, snow breaking out during the day tomorrow across Montana and into Wyoming, and then by the time we get to later Wednesday night, into the western halves of South Dakota and North Dakota, and into western half of Nebraska. And of course, with that trough pinned over there, that low is going to wind up moving northeast and heading up toward western Wisconsin, where it deepens down into a 990, 988 something, 980-ish low by the time we get to the end of the week, and still seeing some snows going on in the eastern Dakotas and on up through Minnesota. The upper air feature here is pretty impressive. That is a very deep trough that's coming in to the northwest, and the trough pivots up and around and cuts off like that, almost like an east-west egg-shaped system that is over the Great Lakes by the time we get to Sunday. And that's going to drive some cooler air into the northeast later Sunday and for the first part of next week as that whole trough shifts eastward. Now there's another arm of that drops southeastward toward the coast, and models were kind of hinting at the possibility of maybe another coastal low of some sort later next week. We'll come back to that after we get done with these two systems this week, before we start worrying about what's happening next week. I'm just, for the first time, going to look beyond that. So you see the jet does relax. A little bit of a ridge pops up in the Gulf of Mexico here, but it's not like what we had where it built all the way up the east coast. There's some ridging there, but it's weak. So this is not the kind of an upper ridge that would produce a long stretch of very warm weather. You might see things, warm up for a couple of days if this is correct, and we don't know that it is. If we once we get past, say, October 19th or 20th, but I would be, I'd be really cautious in drawing any kind of conclusions with regards to, beyond the 10-day period. There's just a whole lot of stuff going on. So, what does it mean as far as snowfall is concerned? Well, this is always kind of tough this time of year, and I'm going to have to use the wide view because the storm's kind of in two different maps. So, look, you can certainly make a case for the fact that there's going to probably be some 6-inch plus snows across Montana and some local 1-foot plus snows there as well, and into parts of Wyoming. The model's particularly bullish across South Dakota and then eastern North Dakota and western Minnesota, assuming that the low gets wrapped up this way. So this is for the date that we're talking about here, which is October, the period starting from tomorrow, which is the 8th, and running right through the 13th. This is a pretty sizable snowstorm for these parts. And I know there's a few of you that watch from northwestern Wisconsin. You got the GFS on your side with this, with regards to producing some snows for your particular area. The European, I did not look at the European's snow map, but when you look at what's going on in the European in terms of the surface in the upper air, it's very similar to the GFS model. This is what the upper air looks like. Again, that deep trough, you're seeing it in 24-hour increments, dropping into the northern plains there, down to South Dakota, Nebraska, north central plains, and then really getting wrapped up as it lifts up to the northeast toward Minnesota and over into the western lakes. And another trough that follows, talking about the energy for later next week. The European kind of handles it a bit differently, but at the very least, this would probably mean a cold front, a strong cold front with a fairly sizable shot of cool air coming in behind it. It's a very, very interesting pattern that we're playing with here over the next week to 10 days. Now, let's go to Typhoon Hagibis. I think I've pronounced it 4 different ways in the course of this live stream. But this is a super typhoon. We are seeing it. I'm using the water vapor imagery, and I also put the latitude and longitude. This is another one of these humongous systems, which is running about 10 degrees north-south and 10 degrees east-west. So we're talking about 600 miles from top to bottom and 600 miles from side to side. And if you look closely, just north of that 15-degree latitude line, you can actually see the pinprick eye on the water vapor imagery that is moving on a course mainly to the west or west-northwest. It's got a long way to go to get to the south coast of Japan, which is on the center of the picture. That little looks like a little finger there that's kind of sticking out. So that's some of the southernmost islands of Japan that you're seeing here. And with respect to their forecast, from what the typhoon, the Joint Typhoon Center is forecasting here, you see they do theirs a little bit differently with the graphics that they use. But on the latest forecast track, it does bring this ashore near Tokyo on the 12th as a Category 2 typhoon. Right now, holding its own and forecast to strengthen. You can see the past track. And it went basically from a depression to a Category 5 hurricane in a little over 48 hours. That's incredible deepening that occurred. And you're seeing the forecasting peak intensity of 145 knots by tomorrow afternoon, and then starting to come off that peak intensity as it moves more northwest and then starts to make the turn to the northeast. Now, this is going to be a recurving typhoon, and eventually will probably find its way up in one form or another up in the North Pacific and maybe even into the Gulf of Alaska. So we could wind up seeing this having some sort of downstream impact on the overall long-term pattern. That is certainly a possibility. But I didn't get a chance to really look at it pretty deep. There's just way too much going on in our own little world and I didn't have a whole lot of time to look beyond the West Pacific and up in that area. But bear that in mind, that you could wind up seeing that eventually having some sort of impact on the longer term pattern, and it might reinforce it could reinforce the trough that currently is in the eastern part of the U.S. So I'm going to come back to you guys here. A nice crowd on board tonight. It's nice to see everybody here after, as I said, a good weekend. Chris Alley, nice to see you, and Jason Schaefer, James NASCAR, Jess Harden, perpetually wanting everybody's opinion now on their long-range forecast for Alabama. I could jokingly say that maybe we should ask the president, but I'm going to refrain. Or maybe I already have asked that question. Let's see. David Schwartz, usually a recurring typhoon in the West Pacific causes a trough in the east. That's correct. Usually, not all things being equal, there are other factors involved, and sometimes they can recurve in there, and they could be non-events. So we have to be a little bit careful because it doesn't always play out exactly the way you want it. And of course, the trough in the east is a pretty big place. So when it's referred to that way, if you specifically want a trough in a certain spot, that might be a bit more problematic. If the typhoon hits Japan, then there will be a ridge in the east, says Mike Talley. Okay, well, that may be so at the point where it moves in, but if we look on the 12th, if the 12th is the day where we're going to wind up, that's Saturday. So this is Saturday or Sunday. So let's go to Saturday. There would be a ridge in the east were it not for this cutoff low. Okay, so take a look at. Let me bring that window back up. The one thing that the one thing that's preventing, if you got a storm going into Japan, if it wasn't for the fact that this is for the same time frame that they have the storm getting close to Japan and Tokyo, you would have a ridge in the east were it not for that cutoff low sitting off the New Jersey coast. You have a deep upper low back over into Minnesota. So you're kind of, I guess technically in most cases you probably would be correct, but in this is one of those particular instances where it's not necessarily working that way because of that upper low. And that upper low kind of stands out because if it is it's outside the main flow of the jet stream. So you can certainly argue that normally that would not necessarily be there. Johnny Quest, as always, thank you so much for hitting Super Chat as that wall of rain gets closer and closer to you, and you just pile on the inches. Bluebird, a new member of our channel, welcome, and thanks for subscribing, and welcome to the chat. You'll find that there's a very, very busy chat board here with conversation that, by the way, in case you don't know, the Patreon folks know, but the chat board usually opens up about a couple of hours before the actual live stream. So, Joe, was a long journey, but job today took me to Joe Chaffee Land and was thinking about you when you went to Smithtown. Oh, you were very close. I'll be very interested. Leaves started changing colors on the southern state. So you were very close to where I am. I'm the next town over. Probably, I was probably 5 miles away from you, and depending on the time of day, it could take 20 to 25 minutes to get from Smithtown to drive those 5 miles, believe it or not. Daniel Fitzsimmons, I wouldn't call it a huge ridge around the 22nd, and I would certainly not hold any faith to whatever's on the long range at this point. That's all up in play. I tend to think that this current pattern that we're in is going to hang around for at least the next 2 or 3 weeks before we see any kind of really important change. That doesn't mean that you can't have a day or two that where it warms up a bit. I just don't think we're going to go back to any kind of extreme like we saw last week with that ridiculous record heat that popped up. Just running back here through the chat board. Northern Grace, nice to see you here tonight. James NASCAR's on here tonight. He hasn't been in a while. Robert Hurley, what will draw that low more northwestward? I know the high over the northern New England, Canada, has playing this, but will the low over the northern plains? The northern plains low, by basically not coming out quickly, is that wants to move east, but everything is just as I described, that log jam. So with that trough being slower, this was something that the models were showing back a few days ago. They kept bringing that trough out too quickly, and that was sort of squashing the system in the east and kind of suppressing it and pushing it out toward the east. But that apparently is not happening. The trough in the west is taking longer and longer to get out of the way. Jess Harden, you should ask James Spahn. I mean, he's the man. He's the big weather cheese in Alabama. So you should ask him about snow chances for Alabama. Okay, I know you really want to get snow. You ask every time. I wish I could give you an answer just so that we can move on to maybe another subject matter. I know you're also waiting for rain too, but ask Mr. Spahn. He knows Alabama weather. He knows the climo. He's well regarded in weather circles, by a lot of folks on social media. I bet you he could at least give you some rough idea of what he thinks with regards to the long range. I don't know that he's a long range guy, by the way. As I said, I shy away from it and will continue to shy away from it. Sadly, winter far enough away that we can still easily get into a pattern flip into something that isn't favorable for snow. Well, that's quite true. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily bet the bank that the pattern that we're holding on to here at this point is going to be the same pattern that you're going to find at the end of November or the beginning of December. There's no guarantee that this goes much beyond the next couple of weeks, and then we see it evolve into something else. And by the way, it's not an A or B. We could see the pattern morph into something that resembles a mix of the two, or perhaps a different variation of the one we have right now. So there's a lot of possibilities going down the road. There's nothing that there's nothing that to me points to that we're definitely going into the direction A or direction B. So it's all going to be part of the fun of watching our weather pattern evolve going forward. Back in another week or two, we could take a look at the progress of Siberian snow cover and North American snow cover. There'll be enough of it on the ground that we can draw a few slight conclusions from it. Kenny Salerno, no snow this winter in New Jersey. Okay, I could probably say that statement, no snow in New Jersey, is probably going to be wrong. I'm sure there's going to be some snow in New Jersey at some point this winter. Robert Brown, doesn't the weather pattern seem familiar with what we saw with Hurricane Florence last year with the blocking high? I have to really, Robert, to be honest, I would have to go back and look to see what the setup was. Florence came earlier. I believe, as I remember, Florence was more back through September. Let me just see the dates are. I'll just do a quick Google search here. Hurricane Florence. Actually, I stand corrected. It actually started as a system back on August 28th when it was first a tropical wave, and then made landfall in reached Bermuda. Swells reached Bermuda around September 7th. And we're talking, so on September 13th, so it made its final approach to North Carolina September 12th and 13th. As I recall, I mean, there was a complete collapse of the steering currents along the East Coast, but the upper air profile in early September is a whole lot weaker than what it is in this a month later in the early part of October. So it's a little bit different. You didn't have any kind of deep trough coming out of the west either. Without looking, I can probably guess that was the case. Izzy D, thanks for hitting Super Chat. Really appreciate it. Give me a heads up the next time you're up out in Smithtown, because once I'm done with TV, I'm going to be home. Chuck Cardillo, passing good wishes to Kenny Salerno. That's a good thing. Scott Briller, thanks for hitting Super Chat tonight. Really appreciate it. Roy Wilson, you want me to send some rain to southeastern North Carolina. You might get brushed by some with all this stuff that's going on with a developing offshore low. I don't know that you're going to get much, but you should get something out of it. But you're going to need a lot more to break the dry conditions that you've had with the heat of the last couple of weeks. Tim Pendleton, my plans after FiOS are pretty simple. Right here is where I'll be. YouTube, my 3 websites, my two weather apps, the meteorologist Joe Chaffee app, and then my buddy Ben Scott, who handles the Angry Weatherman weather app. If you haven't downloaded it and you're on you have an Android device, go ahead and download that too, so that you have both apps there to keep you front and center on what's going on weather-wise. But I am going to be focused to doing my online stuff all the time. Trish and Lou, you want the NAM snowfall map for Wisconsin? All righty, let's see what we can do here. By the way, we're going to probably be coming up very shortly on the Hurricane Center's 8 o'clock update, so I can certainly pull that up. Let's see the NAM total snowfall for Wisconsin. And unfortunately, the NAM model, Trish and Lou, only goes out to Thursday night. So this is 2 a.m. on Friday. So it doesn't go out far enough. But the GFS does go out further, so we can take a look at the GFS's view. And there you have it. Gives a few inches there into Wisconsin. And if since we have it up there, you can, by the way, go to tropicaltidbits.com and do this all for yourselves if you'd like. The 18Z, which is through Saturday afternoon on the Icon model, which is the German model. We have some what looks like just maybe a little bit of snow, maybe enough to make a coating in some places in northwestern Wisconsin. and that's really about it from the standpoint of the icon. The icon model is actually fairly bullish. They all the models seem to be centering in on the western parts, eastern North Dakota, western Minnesota, northeastern South Dakota, and that's where I think that's where you're going to see the max area from this, because that's where the upper low is going. The very cold dynamic upper low, the upper feature headed up that way, is going to be very productive, I think, in terms of snow. And you might have maybe some places where you could see near blizzard conditions, perhaps with that wrapped up upper low, with some pretty strong winds that are quite possible in that particular area. So let me just come back to you guys on the board here. Let's get rid of this. Again, tropicaltidbits.com. We thank Levi Cowan for letting us use his site on a regular basis. Scott Briller, 2 Izzy D Super Chat hits, and Johnny Quest. Thank you so much, all of you tonight, for hitting Super Chat. Now let's see what the Hurricane Center, if they've changed anything with regards to their 8 o'clock forecast. Usually if they update these things early, it usually means that they haven't changed much from it. So now we are at 8 o'clock, and with respect to the system that's out in the central Atlantic, they have left that to the same. Conditions, environmental conditions are forecast to be generally conducive for the low to acquire some subtropical or tropical characteristics over the next day or two, and formation through the next 48 hours and for the next 5 days, both at 50%. Now, with the systems off the East Coast, both the same. The only change is that with the system that is headed toward us, the one that they have further to the north off the Florida coast, 10% in the next 48 hours versus 0, and still at 30% over the next 5 days. When I showed you before, I had the parent low and the child low. So the child low was 10 and 10. So that's the one that's sitting a little low in southern Florida. So they're rating that 10 and 10 versus, I think from earlier they had 0 and 0 for that, or maybe they had 0 and 10. So they made a slight adjustment in terms of their forecast. So all right, so let's leave it here. Going to see what happens with regards to the overnight models, and then we'll update that tomorrow morning on Weather in 5, which you'll have here on YouTube. I'll try to get it done by 8 o'clock, 8:30 tomorrow morning Eastern Time. And then tomorrow evening, we'll be back doing our live stream at 7 o'clock Eastern Time. In between that, website posts at meteorologistjoechaffee.com, also on nycweathernow.com, and if you are on Long Island, weatherlongisland.com. There's a post coming out in about 10 minutes with regards to what Long Islanders can expect with this low over the next several days. And of course, you can get all of that if you download my free weather app on Google Play or on the App Store. That is just a click away from you if you go to Google Play or the App Store and just search Meteorologist Joe Chaffee. For those of you who are interested in getting a more complete weather experience, and you can become part of my weather platform on Patreon. And I've got the link up there on the board. This is a subscription platform. It's just $2 a month, and you get a lot of extra weather, including your own extra live stream Weather in 10, which today we did. We focused on the European model. And one other way, and I thank those of you who have done this. Many of you have, but this is an easy way to support my channel, and it really doesn't cost you anything. Out of your own pocket. If you're shopping on Amazon, use this link and use the search bar to get whatever you want. You don't have to buy what's actually listed there, but if you use this link, Amazon throws me back a little bit of coin, and that helps me keep ads on the app to a minimum. We're a participant in the Amazon Services LLC Associates program, which is an affiliate advertising program designed to provide a means for us to earn fees by linking to Amazon.com and its affiliated sites. Thanks very much for being here. Earl Warren, nice to see you on board tonight. Joe Chaffee. Yes, thank you. Thanks very much. I appreciate everybody being here. Always have a good time Never a negative experience, and I hope it's a good experience for all of you. And I assume it is because you keep coming back, unless you're gluttons for weather punishment. Have a great night, and we'll see you tomorrow.